Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So welcome to this first of the Sunday afternoon talks for 2023 or 2566 according to the our Thai Buddhist calendar. The theme for this afternoon is breathing spirit into form, using how to use religious conventions skillfully, but without losing sight of the spiritual goal. So I endeavour to offer a few reflections. Usually for these Sunday afternoon talks, the talk is for about 1 hour, and then we have a break for some tea and a pause, and then a period of about 40 minutes at the end for some questions and Dhamma discussion. So I was pondering this theme about spirit and form and religious conventions and the sort of customs and structures that we have. And I was reminded of a dialogue Luang Por Sumedho often refers to when he was a young monk in his early days at Wat Bapong with Venerable Ajahn Chah. And one day, somewhat out of the blue, Ajahn Chah said to him, "Oh, Sumedho, you must be confused." And he didn't give a particular reason why he thought he would be confused straight away. And so Luang Por Sumedho asked, "So why is that, Luang Por?" And he said, "Well, the Dhamma is all about letting go, and the Vinaya is all about holding on. Our Vinaya discipline, the monastic rule, and the conventions that we live by. So the Dhamma is all about letting go, the Vinaya is all about holding on, doing this, not doing that, and following the conventions and structures. So that must be confusing." And he said, "Yes, come to think of it, it is. It is confusing." And then as Luang Por Sumedho talked about that incident, then at the time he felt that Ajahn Chah was going to launch into some kind of extensive explanation and the description of how those things, how they worked together, how they were both part of our lives. But he simply said, when you figure out how those work together, then you'll be fine. That was it. When you figure out how those work together, you'll be fine. So it's not something easy to explain, but it's something to explore and get a feeling for, how these different principles work. The principle of Dhamma, of the transcendent reality, the fundamental and transcendent ultimate reality of things, and then also the structures and conventions, the forms that we live with. How do they work together? How can they support each other? Please do come in. Yes. So it's one of the issues with pretty much every single religious institution around the world, this habituation that occurs to the customs, the forms, the structures. Within our Theravada Buddhism, we have our own particular patterns of doing things like chanting the Namo Tassa before a Dhamma talk, or the way that we bow, the way we wear our robes, the form of the temple, the shrine, the positioning of the Buddha image, these standard forms that we're very used to. But every religious tradition around the world has similar structures in a Christian church or an Anglican church or a Catholic church, and they have their own structures in a mosque, in a synagogue, in a gurdwara, in a Hindu temple, in the say Native American traditions, African spiritual traditions in Australia, the tribal traditions all around the world. Every society has its own structures and forms of religious observances. And I would say that it's a bit of a sweeping statement, but I would say the issue of getting habituated to go into sort of an automatic pilot with respect to the traditions and customs and forms is something that we find everywhere around the planet, in every society, every community, every group, whereby some form like baptizing or bowing or bathing in the river Ganges or recitation of certain scriptures and the sound of particular words and forms, they're taken as having intrinsic value or meaning. And this is particularly good, or this is particularly bad, or this is right, this is wrong, this is how it should be done, this is how it shouldn't be done. So every religious form around the world, what happens, I would say, people who are part of a religious tradition, you get habituated. That you've been bowing so many times that your body is bowing, but your mind is off at Tesco's or Waitrose or planning your holiday next week, or recollecting the argument you had at lunchtime. Yeah, we go through the motions very, very easily, carrying out ceremonies, chanting when you are reciting the Namo Tassa. Again, I'm not reading anybody's mind, but how easy it is as your mouth is reciting the Namo Tassa. Then again, you're off at Waitrose or Aldi or planning the evening ahead, or just thinking about somebody else in the community or someone in your family. So that the theme for this talk, breathing spirit into form, is looking at these forms that we use, say particularly within Theravada Buddhism, of course, because that's kind of what we do here. That's our thing. The forest tradition of Theravada, as the monastic customs and discipline and forms that we use. But how do we breathe spirit into that? How do we make them really alive and useful? How do we work with that habituation process, that kind of tendency to go onto automatic pilot? Whereby there's kind of two extremes that the Buddha outlined that we fall into. One is where we sort of switch off and don't even notice that we're following a particular form as you're performing the Mass in a Catholic church, or you're reciting the monastic rule in a Theravada monastery, or you're reciting prayers in a synagogue or a gurdwara. You switch off and you're somewhere else altogether. Or the other extreme is, this is absolutely important, this is totally real, this is completely sacred, this is totally significant. And if the water doesn't touch the head of the baby in the baptism, then the child is not saved, or not fully and properly baptized, and is not therefore guaranteed a place in heaven and such like. I'm not trying to make fun of any particular religious tradition, but just how we veer towards these two extremes. Either the form is absolutely real and meaningful and is 100% sort of true and valid, just the form on its own, or the form is so familiar that we don't even really notice that we're using it. So when the Buddha was speaking to Venerable Mahakachana in one of the most significant teachings in the Pali Canon, in the Samyutta, the connected discourses, this teaching to Mahakachana, he said, the belief, the view that everything is real, everything exists, that's one extreme. the view that nothing exists, nothing is real. That's the other extreme. By adhering to these two extremes, then we create suffering and confusion. And the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle way. And what is that middle way? It's with ignorance as condition that formations come to be, and with formations as condition, consciousness. And he explains the whole of the pattern of dependent origination. So in considering this area, this looking at religious forms and how to use them, I think it's helpful to look at it in terms of these two extremes we tend to follow. Either, yes, this is how you should bow, and if you don't bow like that, that's wrong. This is how you pronounce the Namo Tassa, and if you don't do it that way, that's wrong. Or you should always recite the Namo Tassa first, and if you don't, that's bad. So that's one extreme, is that this is absolutely real and significant and important, or that it doesn't matter at all, it's insignificant, or you just completely so habituated, so used to it, you don't even notice it. So those are that I would say, I would offer for consideration that those are the two extremes that people tend to fall into. So one of the insights that the Buddha had before his enlightenment was about this area, and there's this very significant passage where, in the dialogue he has with a spiritual teacher called Saccaka, a pundit called Saccaka, in the Maha Saccaka Sutta, the longer discourse to Saccaka. And he's talking about his own career, his own spiritual path, and running up to the time when he left his companions and went off to discover the middle way, he had this insight into religious forms. And he, at this time, was a very, very ardent ascetic. He was very, very hard on himself to the extent that he was almost starving through emaciation and eating so little food. He said he could touch the skin of his stomach and he could feel his backbone. He was so skinny. And he would just sometimes just black out, pass out because of dizziness and say weakness because of starvation and self-deprivation and self-torture. And up to that point, he'd had the opinion that the more painful it is, the more that you're purifying yourself. The more difficult, the more the austerity is, then the closer you are to enlightenment. That experience of pain and difficulty was in and of itself purifying. So it was during that time he had this insight. So these images appeared to him. It was about how to light a fire. And he said, these images appeared spontaneously in his mind before his enlightenment, when he was a bodhisattva. And he said, so if you have a wet piece of green wood that's full of sap, and it's lying in water, and you fish it out of the water, and you try to light a fire with it. Then, and if you're rubbing two sticks together, what they call with an upper fire stick and a lower, and the log is a lower fire stick. And that's the way you start wood, by rubbing sticks together. He said, would you be able to start a fire with it? And he realized, no, you wouldn't, because it's a wet, sappy piece of wood and it's lying in water. So no matter how hard you tried, whether or not you experienced painful, racking feelings due to striving, then you wouldn't be able to light a fire with it. If you had to cut a long story short, there was a few similes that came to his mind, that if you have a dry piece of wood away from water, and you use an upper fire stick to drill it and to raise heat, would you be able to start a fire with it? And he realized, well, you would, because it's a sapless piece of wood. It's away from water. It's dry, and so you would be able to start a fire with it, whether or not you experienced painful, racking feelings due to the striving. So he had this insight that the difficulty or the painfulness of the effort is not the thing that's purifying. What matters is the dryness of the wood and the readiness of the combustibility of the wood. That's what matters. And so he realized it's nothing to do, spiritual development and realization, it isn't anything to do with experiencing pain. It's to do with the conditions of the mind and the attitude that's present. And he realized what really matters is the quality of purity of heart. And so whether it's painful and difficult or whether it's easy and comfortable, that's beside the point. What really matters is that there's a heart that's free of greed, hatred, and delusion. There's a wholesome intention, and the effort to light the fire is being done in the appropriate way, right? Rubbing the small stick into the notch on the top of the lower stick, and that's how you would get smoke and start a fire. So that was a big insight for him. It's like, I've been putting all this effort over the idea that more pain is somehow liberating, more tapas, more austerity, but I've got that wrong. That's just not the way it works. And so he had the courage and the initiative to let go of this whole system of practice that he'd followed for the previous 6 years and was sort of generally assumed way to do things in his time, and to go his own way, to trust his intuition, to trust those images of how to light a fire. And he realized, my intentions are pure. My heart is in a pure state. I have a lot of wholesome qualities here, and I'm ready to make the effort. And so I'll stop focusing on trying to create more pain and consider the pain to be somehow automatically, intrinsically liberating. So that was the form that he was following, was that more pain equals closer to enlightenment. And he decided, no, I'm just believing in that blindly, and that this insight that he had showed that wasn't really the case. So he had the courage to go his own way, and then he also realized, I'm so emaciated, I'm so exhausted, I'm so starved that I can't possibly sustain effort in a continuous and helpful way. So that's why he accepted the rice gruel from Sujata and ate some food and began to build up his strength. His companions thought he'd given up the path and had lost his way because he was eating ordinary food, and thought, we're on three rice grains a day. What are you doing eating a whole bowl of porridge? Shameless, indulgent monk. But the Buddha trusted his own intuition and was ready to receive the criticism or the negative impressions of his companions. And then that led to his discovery of the middle way, and then to his full enlightenment. So that readiness to question the forms and structures and to be guided by intuition, I would say that's a very good example, a perfect example of breathing spirit into the form, that there was that questioning attitude and the readiness to go against habitual beliefs and to be guided by experience. Also, considering this theme, I was remembering how when I first showed up at the International Forest Monastery in January of 1978, I had very, very little experience of Buddhism. I'd never read a Buddhist book. I'd read lots of other spiritual books, all sorts of different, from the Hindu tradition or from the Taoist tradition, from Sufism, from Christianity, mystical Christianity, and various different called shamanic texts and such like. I'd read all sorts of different things, but very, very little on Buddhism, if at all. I think the only kind of Buddhist book that I'd ever read was called The Zen of Seeing by Frederick Frank, which was more about drawing than about Zen per se. And I'd been on one weekend of teachings with a Tibetan Buddhist master, His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche, when I was a student, a friend of mine who was into Tibetan Buddhism, who was from a college in London, and sort of was very enthusiastic about this great Lama coming to London and give teachings. And so he said, "You've got to come. This great Lama is coming to London. You know, it's a great opportunity." But I must confess, with all due respect to the great Lama, that it went completely over my head. But the only thing I can remember of anything from that weekend was that I was impressed by how the people seemed to sit up really straight and looked and sat very, very still for long periods of time. And I thought, wow, that's impressive. That the kind of the students were sitting upright and sitting still for a long time, and I couldn't do that at that time. And the only other thing that really impressed itself on me was queuing up for a long, long time to see this terama, this treasure that the Rinpoche was showing to each person as a kind of empowerment, which was a small clay Buddha image that was supposed to have been made by Padmasambhava from clay from the Naga realm. So it was in this little reliquary, and he would open up the door, and each person could see it for a couple of seconds, and that's all I remember. Actually, Buddhism, what the Buddha taught, I don't remember a word. None of that stuck. But I remember the little clay image, and I remember people sitting up straight and being bright-eyed and peaceful. So I knew virtually nothing about Buddhism when I walked into Wat Pah Nanachat. And within a day or so, I had a very strong feeling that this was exactly the kind of thing that I was looking for. With the way of life in the forest monastery, and the focus on meditation, and the kind of down to earth quality of the life, and the simplicity and straightforwardness of both the monks and novices there and the villagers, that really appealed to me. So within a couple of days, I realized I had the strong intuition, I'm going to be here for a long time. This definitely feels like a shoe that fits. And because I had just finished a degree in psychology and physiology at London University, and I decided to study psychology to understand my mind a bit better. But after 3 years of academic psychology, again, with all due respect to my revered teachers, I was not a lot happier than I was. I didn't understand myself much better than when I started out. I was a confused 21-year-old rather than a confused 18-year-old. So, no disrespect to my teachers, but I could see in the monastery that this was something that was really appealing. So at that time I had an interesting insight, because I could feel that, this really seems to be exactly the thing I'm looking for. So right now I know nothing about Buddhism. And I noticed how when you went to a new school or a new institution, or you met a new group of people, you went to a new country, at first you know nothing, you don't know the place, you don't know the people, you don't know where anything is. And then over a little while, you get attuned to the place where you are, the people you're with, and the value system of the people there. And then within a while, suddenly you've acquired that value system. And so this very clear thought appeared in my mind, despite being a confused 21-year-old. It was like, okay, now you're entering into this, so you know nothing. So remember, right now, you don't know anything about Buddhism, you don't know anything about the Buddha's teaching, you don't know these people, you don't know anything at all. It's a blank slate. Now, watch a world arise. Because before too long, if this follows the same pattern as when you went to a new school or to a new college, or you're going on holiday someplace, it's going to be exactly the same. You will acquire that same value system that doesn't exist in your mind yet, but watch and see what happens. And that was, I don't know why that appeared in my mind so clearly and strongly, but it was very, very valuable, because 6 months later, then of course I knew this is a really good ajahn, that's not such a good ajahn, this is a really good monastery, that's an awful monastery, this is how you should bow, and this is how you shouldn't bow, this is how you should chant, and then in the back there was that 6 months ago I'd never even heard of Theravada Buddhism or Mahayana Buddhism. I'd never heard of Ajahn Chah or Ajahn Mahabur or Ajahn Tate, or none of that. I hadn't heard their names. I knew nothing. And so it was very helpful to have that clear, conscious recognition of this is a world that has arisen, this is a value system that has been acquired. And so that in terms of the theme for the day, breathing spirit into form, it was it was helpful to remember this is an acquired system. These are not absolute truths. The mind is giving these things value. But 6 months ago, you knew nothing of this. This was all completely fresh to you. So that was a very important, significant way of keeping a perspective on all those forms, because I wanted to do things right and be a good anagarika, a good novice, a good monk, and do everything properly, and not be a bad monk or do things badly or in a casual way. But I could see how the mind is trying to make these things absolutely true, absolutely real, absolutely solid, and yet, say, well, 6 months ago, I knew nothing about this. I've often mentioned how I think I was an anagarika and we were cleaning the shrine the day before the moon day, and I said to one of the novices I was cleaning the shrine with, I said, "It's funny, all these Buddha images look Indian." He said, "Why is that funny?" And I said, "Well, he was from China." Yeah. This novice said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, the Buddha was Chinese. Why do they make the Buddha images look Indian?" And the Buddha was not Chinese. He was born in what is now Nepal. And I said, no, everyone knows the Buddha was from China. Of course, I was ready to be an authority, even though I basically knew nothing. But so that I really didn't know anything. But I still use that recollection of that. Having had a blank slate to start off with and seeing how all these certainties and ideas and how you do it, how you don't do it, what's right, what's wrong, arose on that, out of that empty place. So in terms of religious forms that we use, there are many and various things, so like the chanting, bowing, the way that things are done in this particular tradition. Also meditation practices, what's an appropriate kind of meditation, what's not appropriate, what belongs to this tradition, what is outside of this tradition. These are all things that we can get habituated to. We can get, as I was saying, you can get so used to chanting and bowing that even though we have a training that whenever you come into a room with a shrine, you should bow 3 times before you go about your business, whatever you're going to do. If you come into your room, there's a shrine, you bow 3 times before you leave, you bow 3 times before you leave. You can very easily be bowing properly, but have your mind somewhere else altogether. You're already thinking about the talk you've got to give in the temple while you're bowing in your kuti. So that we can get habituated very easily, bowing, chanting, meditation practices, listening to Dhamma talks. It's very easy to heard so many Dhamma talks you sat down to. When you start out, it's like, wow, this is really amazing, this is all so new, this is so interesting. And then 6 months or a year later, you sit down, close your eyes, Namo Tassa Bhagavato, and we just somehow we go off somewhere, and we're still managing to sit vaguely upright, and then Ewang at the end of the talk, and upright. Ewang Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu. And Luang Por Chah talks about the same kind of process, whereby you don't even realize the talk is coming to an end, but something in you picks up the change of the tone of voice or some kind of phrase that says, that's enough for today, and then, okay, Sadhu. So this is where the form has not had spirit breathed into it. I'm not judging anyone. I'm trying to make fun of anybody but I've been there myself many times, many times. So then also the beliefs and attitudes, Theravada Buddhism, why the Theravada Buddhism is good and how it's different from Vajrayana or Mahayana, or how it's different from Christianity or from Islam or Judaism or theistic religions or Vedanta. so that our beliefs and our attitudes, and also our identity, we can say, I am a Buddhist, or I am a Theravadan, or I am English. That I'm an English Buddhist, I'm a British Buddhist. That's what I am. So we can take religious forms and build an identity around all of those. And it should be said that for Westerners, again, it's a bit of a sweeping statement, but there is a small advantage for Westerners coming into Buddhism because most of us didn't have parents who were Buddhists or families that were Buddhists. I do have my second cousin was I.B. Horner, who was a very eminent Buddhist scholar, but I didn't know she existed until I was already a monk. So she didn't have any. People often think, oh, obviously you became a bhikkhu because of your sainted aunt, I.B. Horner. And I said, no, I didn't even know she existed till I was already a monk when I found out she existed. I saw her name on the back of the Vinaya books, the translations of the Vinaya books, and I thought, oh, I wonder if that's a relative. Ha, ha, ha. And it was. Her father and my grandfather were brothers, so amazingly enough. But she had no influence on my life. So for many Westerners, we've come into Buddhism because of our own interest, and so we're not sort of conditioned. We haven't inherited a whole lot of customs and rituals and superstitions and things from our families. So there's a small advantage, I would say, for Westerners coming into Buddhism because we don't have that kind of automatic belief in the effects of past karma or the influence of other realms, of beings in other realms, or the biases that we've grown up with from if you come from an Asian family with a long history of connections with Buddhism and Buddhist traditions and customs and forms. So I would say that Westerners have a small advantage, but we have a disadvantage, the other side of the same coin, in that we can be very attached to our so that the position of I'm free of attachments. I haven't grown up in the Buddhist culture. I'm free of any kind of cultural conditioning. I'm not influenced by any of that. Those quote unquote Asian trappings. So that we can be attached to our opinions, and particularly attached to our idea that we're not attached. If you can follow that. I'm a Westerner, I'm not attached to any of that. But in fact, you're attached to what Ajahn Amaro once referred to as an irrational disbelief. An irrational disbelief in past life, karma, past lives and future lives, and the influence of the remote actions on the present experience, or the future results of our actions today. So we can, as Westerners, we can think that we're unattached, but our lack of what we think of as our lack of attachment can be actually an attachment to our skepticism and we have our own sets of beliefs and rituals and customs and forms that we are very attached to. So I've lived most of my life as a monk in the West, so I've had quite a lot of contact with Westerners and Western Buddhists, and it is quite interesting how that there's a sort of dismissal, a kind of a pushing away, a vibhava tanha, a sort of desire to get rid of Asian customs and forms and traditions, but without noticing that there's a whole crowd of Western customs and forms and traditions that we're equally attached to, like having publishing books with your name on, or attaching to particular forms of meditation practice, attaching to your opinions about there's no past lives, no future lives. I was just thinking one of our good friends in the USA, who was a Dhamma teacher for many, many years, who just passed away recently, and I remember having a dialogue with him and some of the other teachers when I was living in America, and he said, "You don't really believe in all of that past life, future life stuff, do you? I mean, do you really believe in all of that? Do you think that has any validity at all? I mean, you can't. I mean, you're a scientist. You can't really believe in all of that." So since I must confess, again, with all due respect, he passed away about a week or two ago. I thought, I wonder if he's having some interesting experiences right now. He might be listening to this Dhamma talk. I won't mention any names, but I did cross my mind, I wonder if he's having some very illuminating experiences that passing through different states of being. So we can be. So the downside of being Western kind of skeptical materialist kind of Buddhism is that we can not notice the attachments that we have to the forms that we adhere to. And again, reflecting on this theme for today, I was reminded of again, mentioning no names. There was an anagarika here many years ago who came out of a sort of hippie anarchist background, and he was very anti-authoritarian and very sort of wary of any kind of structures and forms, any kind of limitation. He wanted to meditate, and he saw the value of spiritual practice, but he was extremely wary of any kind of forms and structures and any kind of the sort of traditions and the sort of inherited models of Buddhism and meditation and Buddhist ideas. And I had got a lot of respect for that. There's a kind of view very much liking the teachings of Krishnamurti and the sort of spiritual teachers that sort of eschew the structures and forms and such like. But at the same time, he was completely addicted to Radio 4. And as monastics, we're not supposed to listen to the radio or watch TV. That, just in case anyone's any doubt, we shouldn't be listening to the radio, shouldn't be watching TV. And he could not give up listening to Radio 4. And he had all these kind of great arguments about why listening to the radio and Radio 4 was somehow different, and it wasn't entertainment. And so I thought, well, you're an anarchist, you're a hippie. Why Radio 4? I mean, that's kind of that's more middle of the road than the white lines, But he was completely immovable. He was not going to give up listening to Radio 4. That was unshakable. So I tried to point out, well, this is just another kind of social structure, social form of, an attachment that needs to be let go of. But nope. That was in the days when you turned the radio on with a dial. So, in terms of breathing spirit into form, then it's not just religious forms. I would say it's also social forms. Our relationships, the way we relate to our working life, what we give value to, our status, whether you're making a big thing of being a teacher or a doctor or a parent, attached to particular roles, attached to the radio, or that your reputation, or it can be attached to your bad reputation. Do you feel I'm a failure? I haven't done anything with my life. I've wasted my years. So that it's not just religious forms that can be benefited by having spirit breathed into them, I would say, but also social forms. Our relationships, our work, the place we live, the things we do, the things we have done. That we can again either sort of give them an inflated value and see them as absolutely important. I am a doctor, I am a parent, I am a mother, I am a father. I did write that book. I am on the BBC. The extreme of substantiality and everything exists. And also the just switching off, going through the motions of just eating the food that we eat, calling it good, calling it bad, wearing the clothes that we think of as being right and good without ever considering, well, why do I call this good? Why do I think of this as right or beautiful, appropriate? And why do I think of that as wrong? So in terms of breathing spirit into these forms, whether it's religious forms or social forms, then I'd say there's three essential elements. The first is mindfulness or heedfulness. When Lumpur Sumedho established Amaravati, There was a particular verse from the Dhammapada that he would quote very often as a kind of motto of Amaravati, which is heedfulness or mindfulness is the path to the deathless, heedlessness is the path to death. The mindful never die, the heedless are as if dead already. That's Dhammapada verses 20 and 21, I think. And so Amaravati meaning the deathless realm, then an appamada is a heedfulness, which is a kind of comprehensive mindfulness, or a mindfulness that's fully attuned with wisdom. So paying attention, first of all, to breathe spirit into form, to help not get lost in either of those extremes, then paying attention, really noticing what is the way I'm relating to this. Why do I call this valuable? Why am I just switching off or not noticing that? I use these forms all the time. Am I noticing what I'm doing? Am I noticing I'm putting on my robe? Am I noticing that I'm bowing or chanting? Am I noticing how I relate to meditation practice? What am I doing? What's going on? What is here? So appamada, mindfulness or heedfulness, that's sort of the key. And then the second one, the second element, is that of wise reflection, which is a kind of an extension of that heedfulness, that readiness to dig into things like, well, why do I call that valuable? Or I follow these patterns, I keep these rules, and we recite all these rules every fortnight. What do they mean? Why do I do this? What's this for? Why do I call this important? And why is this valuable? What's the purpose of this? So that quality of wise reflection, or yoniso manasikara in Pali, or also Dhamma Vicaya, the investigation of reality. And then the third one, I would say, is then challenging those assumptions, challenging those beliefs and attitudes, so that not just noticing or questioning, what are the attitudes and what are we believing in completely, or what are we switching off and ignoring, but when we notice what those habits are, challenging them, questioning, and say, bringing those in a way, shaking up, being ready to shake up our own little world. Many years ago, Luang Por Sumedho gave a very, very beautiful analogy about religious forms. And he said it's like if we're in a prison cell, if we're locked up in prison, and the Buddha comes along and gives us the key to our cell and says, here's the key, all you have to do is put it in the lock, turn it, and let yourself out, and you are free. And so then what we tend to do on this theme of religious forms is we say, oh my goodness, the Buddha gave me the key. Wow, this is so special, this is so precious. So we immediately put the key up on the shrine, hang it up on the wall, and start bowing to the key. And the Buddha gave me this is amazing, this is wonderful. The Buddha himself gave me the key. Wow, this is so precious, this is so good. And completely ignoring the fact that you're still locked in your prison cell. And that if you're going to use the key the way the Buddha intended, you put it in the lock and turn it and let yourself out. But instead, we put it up on a shrine and bow to it. And I remember when Luang Por Sumedho gave that talk years ago, and I think it's included in the book Citta Viveka, that sense of, that's exactly it. That's exactly what we do. So I feel that in terms of wise reflection, that's a really good image to bear in mind. Like, am I taking the key, the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, keeping the precepts, following my routine of meditation, and going along to the Buddhist group, running the Buddhist group, publishing books? Am I just worshipping the key, or am I actually using the key to open the door to get out of the prison cell? So that I was particularly wanted to share. So in terms of challenging the customs and traditions that we have. When Ajahn Chah came to the West for the first time, he's an extremely reflective and observant person. I'm sure most people here have read any of his books or been around these teachings for some time will realize that. So he had a very interesting time coming to the West, because there's so many different customs and forms and practices. And that even though he was an extremely strict orthodox Theravada monk, he wasn't attached to the orthodoxies and the forms that he was used to. And so when he went back to Thailand, one of the talks he gave to the community, and again, I think that talk is included in the very first book of his teachings that were published in English, Bodhinyana. He said, in the West, they relate to things very differently than we do here in Thailand. So for us Thai people, the head is really sacred. So you'd never touch somebody on the head unless it was your child or someone comes to the monastery and says, "Please tap me on the head, Luang Por," and as a blessing. He said, but really, why is it sacred? He said, in the West, people might casually just sort of tap each other on the head, or they don't relate to they might kind of just muss somebody's hair or tap somebody on the head, and the other person doesn't get the slightest bit offended. He said, so I saw that happening a couple of times, and I thought, wow, that's really different. But then I thought, hey, but the head really isn't that different from a cabbage. It's kind of round and mostly hard, and it's kind of, what's the difference between a person's head and a cabbage? And even reading that in English, like 40 or 50 years after he gave that talk, you can almost hear the intake of breath in the Sala Wat Pong. Cabbage, how can you say that? It's like a galampi. You can't say that. Yeah. Or with all due respect to Thai people, that in Thailand, people from India can be looked down upon. There tends to be again, I realize I'm being recorded and filmed, but I would say it's not an exaggeration for when using a reference to somebody from India, konkaek. There's a kind of derogatory tone. Ajahn Kongwit is nodding gently, thank you very much. And so when you say that the Buddha was Indian, again, which he was, he was from India, or Nepal at least, then if you say that sometimes to Thai people, with all due respect, there's a, well, he was Indian, but there's a tone that's part of the conditioning. Again, I'm British, or I'm a Euro-mongrel really, but I have a mixed ancestry from all over Europe. But I would say that I've noticed that when I casually mention, well, the Buddha was from India, Buddha ben konkaek. There's a certain movement can be discerned. Oh, that's probably not the right way to put it. I could probably phrase that differently because it seems to be having an effect. But noticing that, and like Ajahn Chah saying, the head's like a cabbage, just challenging those assumptions. Well, actually, the Buddha was born in Nepal and spent all his life in India, and he wasn't Chinese, he wasn't Thai, he wasn't Lao or Cambodian. That's where he was born, and that's where he lived. So, okay, look at that. If there is a reaction there, then we can take those kind of ways to challenge that. Similarly, another incident mentioning Ajahn Chah was when, in the hot season, going out on the alms round in the morning, you go out at about 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning, still fairly cool, but things heat up very quickly. So by the time you're walking back to the monastery after a long alms round, it can get pretty sweaty. And in the forest monasteries, Ajahn Chah was very strict about if the Sangha going out in the morning, if there isn't a chance of rain, you wear all your robes, all three robes. So you have the thick double layer robe on top of the single layer robe. So in the hot season, you're pretty sweaty by the time you're heading back to the monastery. So after you've left the village and walking through the countryside, through the rice fields, before you get to the monastery, sometimes it will be considered quite okay to hitch your robe up over your shoulder so that a little bit of air could circulate next to your skin, so to aerate the body a little bit, to cool it off a bit. And so that was considered, some people would consider that quite okay, to hitch up your robe. You're outside the village, you're not improperly dressed. some of Ajahn Chah's disciples consider that completely shameless, and that absolutely should never be done. Only shameless monks hitch their robes up like that. So Ajahn Chah knew that one of his disciples was coming to visit, came to stay with him for a few days, and he knew he was particularly keen on this rule of, good monks would never, ever, ever hitch their robe up when they're walking back from the village in the hot season. And Ajahn Chah took him out on an alms round, and they were walking back from the village together, and Ajahn Chah casually hitched his robe up over his shoulder. I wasn't there, but I have heard that the story is told that accidentally on purpose, forgetting that this his respected disciple had a sore spot with that, and so just to see what he would do. Okay, this technically, according to the Vinaya discipline, is totally appropriate, but this monk thought it was too sloppy, too casual. And so, but here is his revered teacher doing exactly that sloppy, casual thing that is my pet peeve, as they say. And so Ajahn Chah was ready to challenge. Okay, who's going to win here? the monk who doesn't like the robes being hitched up over your shoulder, or the reverence for your beloved teacher? Where's it going to go? Just to challenge that attachment. So in terms of breathing spirit into form, that challenging the structures that we create, or what we call this is right, that's wrong, it should be this way, it shouldn't be that way, to notice where the mind is like, Lumpur has hitched his robe up. How could he do that? Doesn't he know that I deeply disapprove of that? He probably does know. So it's helpful when those attachments are challenged. In the Zen tradition in Japan, there was even one great Zen master. I'm not sure what the name was, but said, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." Which is a dramatic way of speaking. If you meet that, if you are seeing that quality of goodness embodied in a particular form, then let go of it. I mean, it's a deliberately dramatic, over-dramatic language, but it's like if you're thinking that purity lies in the form, then you've got it wrong. So, and then that took shape in that particular expression. And again, there was an exchange between Lumpur Cha and the young Ajahn Sumedho when one day the young Ajahn Sumedho went to Ajahn Chah with a list of criticisms of faults that he saw in Ajahn Chah's behavior, how he would occasionally smoke cigarettes, or he would chew betel nut, and none of the other monks would smoke, or none of the other monks were allowed to chew betel nut, but he, as the Ajahn, was setting a bad example because he would smoke cigarettes, or he would chew betel nut. And he was the only one in the Sangha who chewed betel nut. Everyone else was forbidden. No one else was allowed to smoke, and many and various other things. And after he delivered this list of criticisms and complaints, then Ajahn Chah said, "Well, thank you very much, Sumedho. It's good that you bring these things to my attention. I hear what you say. I receive your criticism. But perhaps it's a good thing that I'm not perfect. Otherwise, you would be looking for the Buddha somewhere outside your own mind." So, point and counterpoint. So, and I'd say that's a sort of Theravada version of kill the Buddha if you meet him. It's like that. Don't look for the Buddha anywhere outside your own mind, your own awareness. So, in terms then of breathing spirit into form, you have a mindfulness of what we're doing, paying attention to that, looking at what we're attached to, what we approve of, what we disapprove of, what we think is good, what we think is bad, and then challenging the attachments that we have. So this is all ways of making the forms come alive. Again, in terms of the Buddha's teaching, every form, every structure, every conditioned thing is seen as being intrinsically empty, void of intrinsic substance. So there is there is no thing really there. As Ajahn Chah put it, all the things of this world are merely conventions of our own creation. Having established them, we get lost in them, giving rise to all kinds of trouble and confusion. And when the Buddha spoke about the five groups of existence, the five aggregates of the body or material form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and discriminative consciousness, he used a set of images that show that the material form or feelings, sensations, perceptions, thoughts and emotions and so on, they have a shape, but there's no essential substance there. So he said, Rupa, the body is like a lump of foam on the river. It has a shape, but there's nothing solid there. Or the sensations, Vedana, is like a water bubble when the rain falls on a pond and it creates a bubble. It's there's a shape for a moment, but then it's gone. Or that perception, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching is like a mirage, like a shimmering shape that you see in the air in the desert. There's a shape and color, but no substance. Or the thoughts and feelings. Emotions are like the stem of a banana plant, like a leek or an onion. There's no hardwood, there's no core. There's just layer upon layer of leaves. You take the leaves away, there's no thing there. There's a stalk, but when you take the leaves away, there's nothing but the leaves. And then vijnana, sense consciousness, or just discriminative consciousness, is like a conjuring trick. It seems as though there's magic being done, but it's a trick. It's not really magic. So there's a form but no essence, no substance, is the way he describes it. And then in the dialogue with Moggaraja, and he said, when Moggaraja said, what's the best way, the most effective way to evade the king of death, to transcend death, the Buddha said, if you see the world as empty, Moggaraja, then the king of death will not be able to find you. That if you see that all things are empty, Sunya, then the king of death will not be able to find you. So that when you bring all this together, I would say, and again we'll have a period of time for some questions and discussion, reflecting on this, if we bring it together, we recognize that like the Buddha's images for the five khandhas, the five aggregates, there's a form, but there's no essence. That nature works according to particular patterns, but there's no fundamental essence or substance there. Like the two extremes, as in the teaching to Kaccayana, all exists as one extreme, nothing exists as the other extreme. Everything is the world of things is absolutely real. Is one extreme. The world of things is completely insignificant. Is the other extreme. So the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle way, by the Majjhima Patipada, and so that the things are causally related. That's the essence of the teaching of dependent origination. Things are idda paccayata, the world of things, they're empty, but the patterns of nature and the field of experience and the natural order, things function according to certain laws and certain patterns. They are empty, but they function according to the laws of nature. They are subject to the laws of conditionality. That's how the world of things works. That's why we use the world of forms, buildings, words, robes, traditions of Theravada Buddhism. We know that this building doesn't really absolutely exist, but it's really useful. And it's designed to last for 1,000 years, which isn't that long in some respects. It can be seen as a long time. But it's a form, it's a structure. It's not intrinsically here, but it's because of these fantastic oak pillars and the good design of the architect, it's going to be here for a while. It has been here for 24 years, and it will probably stay here for a long time. So it doesn't have an intrinsic absolute existence, but its form holds together according to the laws of nature. So when we remember that any kind of structure there's a form, but without any essence, then we realize every word, every tradition like bowing, chanting, meditation practices, the robes we wear, the teachings of the Pali Canon, these are all convenient fictions. They do have a structure. You have the words of the Pali Canon. We recite it, lots of it, a lot of the time. This building has a structure. These robes have a particular pattern, yes, but they are convenient fictions. And it's mysterious, is that when that it's recognized that the words, the ideas, the customs, the forms are convenient fictions, there's nothing absolutely there, but they work according to the laws of nature, they relate and function according to the laws of cause and effect, then that's how spirit is breathed into form. The forms come alive when we recognize that they're empty. There is a form, but it's empty. And so it's ironic and mysterious how that works. But it's when we recognize, oh, this isn't really a building. This isn't really a person. This isn't really a Sunday. But we call it Sunday. We call it a building. We call it a person. And the structures function according to the laws of nature. If I say the words, this isn't really a building, it doesn't just suddenly evaporate. Or I say, this isn't a person, doesn't mean suddenly I disappear into a rainbow. But it's changing the perspective on that. It's saying, oh yes, of course, this is just bricks and oak beams and plaster and glass all came together and was put into this form. Here it is. But it's fluid. It's in a state of change. It's not absolutely permanently here. But it's convenient to have a Sunday afternoon talk-in. And so that when we are able to recognize that, and we bring that recognition to the forefront of the mind with mindfulness, then we can really appreciate the structures that we use, the buildings that we have, the religious forms and the social forms that we use. They come alive by being remembered, by it being recollected that there's no thing absolutely there, but this is a really convenient fiction that can be used for beneficial purposes. So I'll leave my reflections there for this afternoon. Ewang. So we can have a break. There should be magically some tea appeared in the cloister, so anyone who'd like a cup of tea. It's just after 3 now, so we'll gather back together at 3:20, and if you have any questions, bring them along at that time. We have a microphone back there, so it would be appreciated if people have questions, if you could use that so everyone can hear. So anything anyone would like to ask or have clarified? Anything you'd like to challenge or question? Then please go right ahead. Everyone is free of all doubts? Question mark? Yeah, if you can use the microphone, please. If you switch it on, yeah.
Hello. Aha. So, how can one establish one's own sort of, I'm not sure if ritual's the word, or schedule in the day as a layperson to encourage practice, to meditation, etc. I find it's fine when I'm staying here or on a retreat, but at home it's just, but do it in a way that is all authentic and not robotic.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. You can. Yeah, I often point out that I never even tried to be a lay Buddhist. So my experience of lay Buddhist practice was 3 weeks of living in Wat Pah Nanachat before I became an Anagarika. So I never even tried to live as a Buddhist layperson. So I can't really speak from experience. So walking into the monastery, then I realized, well, this is great. So I didn't leave. So I don't have personal experience of the kind of area that you're asking about, but I certainly have talked with lots of people and given people advice and heard people's experience over many, many years around this. So it's a mixture of establishing a structure, but then also bearing in mind what's the intentionality behind that, so that I will, say, sit for at least 40 minutes every morning. You kind of establish that, okay? And then you see that the intention behind doing that is to start your way in a skillful fashion, start your day in the best way that you can. But then also noticing how you relate to that, how if a day comes where you don't manage to get your meditation in, do you feel guilty? Or like, oh, Ajahn Amaro is going to find out I missed my meditation 3 times this week. Eek! I hope no one tells him, And then you think, oh, look at that. The mind is creating a guilt trip over something that I've established for myself under my own initiative. Wow, look at that. So along the way, again, the appamada, that heedfulness, looking at what the mind is doing with those structures, and so that you're both applying the structure because of the particular benefits it has, but also looking at the habits of mind in relationship to that, or how you like I'm describing my experience of going to Wat Pah Nanachat. So it could be that I'd never even met a Buddhist monastic in my life, and then 6 months later I'm judging who wears their robes well and who doesn't wear their robes well. Like that's the right way. That's a really sloppy way, and just to say, oh, look at that judgment. Where's that arisen from? What's behind that? So that you're both applying the forms, and then you're keeping it fresh. So as you say, not becoming robotic about it. That there's not an intrinsic worth in any particular practice. But certainly keeping the precepts seriously, making a heartfelt commitment to the 5 precepts, and then endeavoring to practice some kind of formal meditation every day. Also practicing generosity where you can, and not just material generosity, but oftentimes when talking about dana, I frequently make the point, nowadays the most valuable thing you can give is your attention. To when you're with someone, that you're not checking your phone, you're not waiting for it to be over so you can get on to the next thing, but you're paying full attention to who you're with, and really doing your best to attune to the situation and to that engagement. So dana isn't just a matter of making material offerings, but giving your sort of heartful attention as well. So that, but then also with all of those things, so with the precepts, with meditation, with practice of dana, then the active practice of reflection, like I was talking about wise reflection, looking at your attitudes, when you feel cheerful, when you feel irritated, when you feel anxious, when you feel depressed, when you feel busy, when you feel sleepy, just to be noticing, oh look, that's what this experience is. And again, if you read many of Luang Por Chah's teachings, over and over and over again, he's referring to how he's picking up a situation and saying, hey, look at that, why do I think that way? Or that you could look at it like this, but also we could look at it like that. And that sense of active engagement with the present experience to be looking at your own moods and attitudes, your own habits, and so that by looking and questioning those and seeing that, then there's we're less of a sort of a servant of our moods, and more the boss. We're not just sort of dragged around by feelings of excitement or anxiety or dullness or whatever, but rather there's that quality of, oh, that's what's happening at the moment. There's this feeling of sleepiness, or this feeling of excitement, or this feeling of regret, or this feeling of let's say, energized engagement. That's what's here, and and with all of those, then to look at the results, because it's not just a matter of engaging in the practice or the activity, but looking at the results. Okay, if you're keeping the precepts, to notice, look at that. I haven't done anything today that I feel regret about. Wow. It's like noticing an empty room. Like, wow, this room has got no clutter in it. So that looking at the results of the meditation, of the sila, of the reflection, and letting those results speak for themselves. That's I would say that's because often we can engage in a particular practice and we can get so busy with the methodology, like reflecting on impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. You get so busy saying anicca dukkha anatta, anicca dukkha anatta, anicca dukkha, that you don't notice the effect of noticing anicca dukkha anatta. You're so busy with the activity that you're not noticing the results of that activity. And again, it can be another aspect of habituation. With meditation practice, you get so used to doing the form of like mindfulness of breathing, or using the reflections on anicca, dukkha, anatta, change and uncertainty, unsatisfactoriness, not self, that you kind of forget, well, what's it all for in the first place? And what it's for is to help the attitude change. So consciously noticing the effects of what we do, or like acts of generosity, that when you're engaged with someone and you're having a conversation, part of you thinks, oh, when's this going to be over? You think, no, just stay, just listen, pay attention. And then looking at the results at the end, I feel really good that I didn't just make an excuse and take off. I feel there's a warmth in my heart at having just not follow that impulse and just listened and spent the time that was necessary with that particular conversation. So we're informed directly by the results of the wholesome things that are done. That's a brief synopsis. So please, any other questions? These days are for you. It's not just for me to sit here and pontificate.
Can I ask something out of topic?
You can ask. I'm not sure if I'll respond.
Are there teaching in the sutras and Theravada tradition about falling to sleep and sleep practice?
Falling asleep?
Falling to sleep, like are the practices that are taught in the sutras about specific teaching before falling asleep?
Yes, yeah. The Buddha is described as he would lie down on his right side. It's called the lion's posture. The lion posture, L-I-O-N, not lying, lie on, the animal. The lion's posture. He'd lie down on his right side with his hand under his right cheek. So if you look at the reclining Buddha image in the Chapel of Rest, the glass Buddha image there, so that shows you how the Buddha slept. So he'd lie down on his right side with his right cheek on his right hand, And then, as it says, setting in mind the time for awakening, he would mindfully fall asleep. That's it. So one, in addition, there's not so much mentioned in the scriptures. One thing that's useful to do is to consciously relax the body. So, for example, if I'm lying down to rest, then I'll make a point of not just relaxing my mind, but bringing my attention down, often to my toes, and notice if there's any tension in my legs or my feet. And then I do know, it's kind of interesting, I do notice that almost always my toes need to relax a little bit. I don't know why, but it's like that. So if you lie down and you try to rest while there's still residual tension in the body, then that works against the sleep process. But if the body is as relaxed as possible, and then the mind can more easily go into a sleep state. Also, the other thing that you do find in the scriptures, but it's not particularly associated with sleeping, but it's in the scriptures, the Buddha establishes that if you're being really mindful, then you don't assume that you have more than 3 or 4 seconds left to live. He says that when he asks a group of Sangha members, how do you establish mindfulness? One of them says, well, I consider that human life isn't more than it's about 70 years. And the Buddha said, no, you don't understand. And then 60, 50, 40, 1 year, half a year, 1 month, half a month, 1 week, 1 day, the time it takes to milk a cow. Yeah, nope. And he goes down the last 2. One says the time it takes to go from the beginning to the end of an in-breath or the beginning to the end of an out-breath. And the Buddha said, you understand. And another one says the time it takes to swallow a mouthful of food that you have already chewed. So if you time it, that's about 3 or 4 seconds. So as a practice, what I do, and if I'm lying down to rest, mostly I will recollect this could be the last out-breath, and there might be no more in-breath. Is anything being held on to? Or is the mind ready for this to be the last breath now, today? Even if I've got to give a talk this afternoon, got to. If this is the last out-breath, I don't have to give the talk. Easy. So that puts everything into perspective, the list of things to do. So relaxing the attitude in terms of letting go of everything, and relaxing the body, and then you sleep very easily. I make no guarantees, but that's... So the Buddha, he was quite okay with sleeping. So like when there's an occasion where Mara comes, when it's the hot season, the Buddha lies down to take a rest in the afternoon, and Mara comes along and says, you're supposed to be a fully enlightened Buddha, what are you doing lying down to sleep in the middle of the day? And the Buddha said, it's the hot season, it's the afternoon, lying down on my right side, I mindfully set in place the time for waking up, and I mindfully go to sleep, and I mindfully wake up. This is blameless. So that even though the Buddha means the one who is awake, he did sleep, but he slept mindfully. Yes, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi. Do you think one should follow one spiritual path, and why? Is that part of conforming, or is it part of like following a specific form of life, religiously and spiritually?
Depends what one means by following. I'm a Theravada monk by profession, literally. But I've always had an interest in a lot of other spiritual expressions, and I'm quite open to different ways of speaking about things. And so I've always been comfortable with different languaging, different forms of expression. And that ever since childhood, it was kind of apparent to me that it couldn't be the case that there was one set of words or one set of customs that had the monopoly on reality. This didn't make sense. From when I was quite small, being told that only this particular group of people would be saved and that everybody else wasn't, because of this particular set of beliefs or customs. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. I didn't know what did make sense, but that didn't make sense. And so I've always been comfortable with a variety of spiritual expressions and mixing different practices together. So other people, that just brings a lot of confusion and anxiety and doubt, anxiety. And so it just doesn't work for them. And so that it's far more helpful to quite consciously leave everything else aside and just use one specific form. So it's kind of down to your personality type, and which is not anything sort of better about or worse in one form or another, but you can't. It's not helpful to assume everyone else thinks the same way that you do. So that if you are quite comfortable, you would say, listening to Hindu teachings or Sufi teachings or the some Native American teachings, and you think, yes, absolutely, that's very well said. And for somebody else, it might be like, what? But the Buddha didn't say that. That doesn't fit. Well, I don't feel comfortable with that. Then okay, it's we start from where we are. So we work with the conditions as we find them. So if it's the case that your mind is quite comfortable with a big variety of expressions, fine. And again, like I was saying to Jonathan, that look at the results of what you're doing. If you realize, I've got my Sufis over here, I've got my Vedanta over here, I've got the Bhakti Yoga over here, I've got Christian mysticism over here, I've got the the way of the white cloud over there. It's like, you realize, okay, this is confusing. Then look at that. You might like the idea of absorbing it all, but it can be very. If you look at it and you realize the results is confusion and a lack of any real development or genuine progress within your own heart, then okay, this is getting too complicated. So let's make a choice here, because, like, say, if you look at the teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi, many people have a lot of respect for him as an extraordinarily wise teacher. So he would teach the kind of affirmation of self. I am that. That the I am is the ultimate reality. I mean, it's a paraphrase, but so if then you say, well, how does the I am of Ramana Maharshi, how does that line up against the all dhammas are not self of the Buddha? Are they opposed to each other? Are they different ways of saying the same thing? And so that if the mind takes something like that and it results in confusion and doubt, then it's not helpful. But if the mind can take those and say, well, it's just like saying, which direction is my finger pointing? From this side, it's pointing to the left. From your side, it's pointing to the right. Same finger. Okay, and so if if the result is not so confusion or doubt, then and it's actually more clarity, then great, take it and use it. Yes, go ahead. Can you switch it on? Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
So, seeing as you've been talking about structures and forms, I have a question about boundaries. And I don't think the question's fully formed, but it's kind of along the lines of, you know, when we need to hold boundaries, like emotional, psychological boundaries rather than physical boundaries, how can we do that in the kindest way?
Yeah, good question. In a monastery, we have lots of boundaries. Both, not just physical, physical boundaries, but also social, psychological boundaries. And so that's fairly familiar territory, I would say, in our monastic training. And so part of it is looking at intention. So if there's a need for a particular boundary, saying, you know, I'm available for this purpose or this person to a certain amount, but I'm not available 24/7, or I'm not available, you know, for all ways of helping or engaging. So if you're looking at the intention, and you see the intention is being kind to your own system, that knowing your own limits and what's going to be a benefit. Like if you're not particularly fit right now, and you say, okay, I'm going to go for a 30-mile run, like I'm just making that up, but go for a marathon. It's like, if you're not prepared, it's going to be really hard on the system. It's going to be really damaging, because you're not. That's beyond the boundary that you're capable of. So knowing your own capacity, and so making boundaries based on a kindness towards your own system is not. It's not because you're hard-hearted or you don't care. It's like I can run for a mile, but I can't run for 30 miles. That's beyond what I'm capable of. And if I try to, it's going to be injurious for me, and everyone's going to lose. So part of it is knowing your intention, and then also knowing your own limitations. Also, just trusting that even if someone says, you've got to help me, or you used to be so available, you're not available anymore, you hate me. It's like, well, I'm just making that up, But that kind of thing where, if you're clear within yourself, like, well, no, it's not because I hate you, it's because I've only got so many hours in the day. And I've got other things that have to be taken care of. And I do care about you. I am very happy to help you, but I can't take away your difficulties. I can't take away your suffering. If I could, I would, but I can't. I can only do so much. And they say, well, if you cared, you'd do more. Again, I'm just making that up. Well, you're welcome to think that, but that's your business. From my own side, I feel I'm doing what I can, and if I could do more, I would do more, but this is as much as I can manage. And it's difficult. We're a very idealistic culture, and should is usually in sort of 72-point capitals. You should be this way, you shouldn't be that way, you should do more, and so on. But if we step back from that, how I should be, from an idealistic position, and we take more the practicalities of how things are, working with our own capacities, our own limitations, and then you're setting boundaries according to that, rather than setting boundaries according to an idealistic, how if I was a perfect person, then I should be able to do this, and I should be able to be like that. Well, let's start from where you are rather than where you should be, or the idealistic version of yourself. So like a Buddha image is an ideal. So that image never gets sore knees. His back never hurts, never has to go to the bathroom, never has to eat or breathe. He's been sitting there since 1999, perfectly composed, because he's an ideal. It's not a living, breathing being. So even the Buddha himself had chronic back pain when he was an old man, And there's quite a number of suttas where he's giving a Dhamma talk, and he'll turn to Mahakachana or Ananda or Sariputra and say, Kachana, my back is paining me. The assembly is still awake. You please carry on giving them a Dhamma talk. I'm going to go and stretch my back. And so he would, the actual living Buddha would take steps to relieve his back pain. This Buddha image doesn't have to, because it's an ideal. But because our culture is quite tends to put the ideal me at the center, and then the other me, the actual me who's got limitations of energy and emotional capacity and so on, that's sort of left off at the edges. So switch the position, and so that the actuality of how we are and what our capacities are and what our limitations are, have that at the center, and have the ideal off at the edges. So that and we have the Buddha image there in a high position. It's a guiding principle, but it's an ideal. It's not alive. It's a kind of a model and an example, but it's the actual humans who come and spend time here in the temple and work with our minds. This is what the temple is for. That's what the shrine is for. It's for us starting from where we are. It's not the temple isn't for the Buddha image. It's for the people. And so I'm not sure if that's responding to all of your questions, but I grew up suffering a lot from trying to make everybody happy all of the time. I'm a compulsive people pleaser. I have been. And so if I was trying to help someone and they were still unhappy, I would make it clear that it was my fault. Yeah, they're still not happy, it's because I haven't done enough. Therefore, their unhappiness is my fault. And it took me a long, long time to come to that sort of different perspective of like, well, no, if I could just take away their dukkha, their suffering, I would, but I can only do so much. And it's not because I don't care, but this is what I can manage. And so if we don't let go of recognize our own limitations, then you've got two suffering beings instead of one. Not yet. There's a switch on the side. If you, there we are. Now we're good. If you slide the switch up, there we are. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for the talk. Thanks for answering questions. I was wondering. Sometimes I have difficulties with forms if I can't find the meaning behind them, or maybe outdated forms. So, for example, we have the precept not sleeping on high or luxurious beds, which we still speak out when we take the 8 precepts, but I feel like it's not conforming to the current reality. And then there's also the eating at inappropriate times, but we can't, for example, have chocolate or cheese outside of those times. And this caused some friction for me. So I wonder how you interpret these rules, and also if it might be that some rules are outdated, or how to deal with outdated forms in general.
Yes, well, you're not the first person to ask these questions. So the wording of the 8 precepts comes sort of directly from the scriptures, and the high and luxurious beds. It would be that would the meaning behind that, or the implication behind that, is that there's an effort to maximize the amount of time sleeping, so that the spirit of that particular rule is to have a simple sleeping place that's not particularly sort of cozy, or that you can sort of wrap yourself up and disappear into sleep. So the spirit of that is encouraging wakefulness, and so that I don't think any of the beds at Amaravati are high or luxurious. Well, maybe high-ish for some of them, but not particularly luxurious. So the spirit behind it is that quality of encouraging wakefulness. And so with regards to food, not eating at inappropriate times, then the spirit behind that is simplicity with regards to food. So it's rather like if you drive a car. I mean, nowadays there's a lot of electric cars. So whether you have a diesel car or a petrol car or an electric car, have you ever gone to a petrol station just because you felt like filling up? Or have you ever gone to recharge your car just because you think, oh, I feel like a recharge? Yeah, like no, we don't think like that. We don't. No one goes to the petrol station because they want the kind of the thrill of filling up their car. I would presume. I'm kind of guessing, but I would say it's pretty rare. Like, oh, look, a petrol station. Let's stop there. And you're not going for the snacks. You're going for the petrol. And it's like we don't think that way. Because we go, the snacks maybe, or the bathroom, we'll be, oh, look, it's a petrol station. But the act of putting petrol into the car, or diesel, or putting an electrical charge, that's not particularly appealing or exciting, but you need it for the vehicle to go places. So that precept, the sixth precept, is encouraging simplicity and practicality in relationship to nourishment. So just eating food in one part of the day, and so that is like relating to food like time to fill up the vehicle. So we go along with our bowl. It's just like going to the petrol station. You fill up your bowl with your petrol and then consume your fuel, and then you're good to go for the rest of the day. So that the intention is to have a very uncomplicated and impartial attitude towards food. And so that the reflection, we haven't done it recently, but in the chanting, I was thinking about doing it this morning, coincidentally. But the reflection on the four requisites, on food, clothing, shelter, and medicine. Then the reflection on consuming food is not for fun, not for pleasure, not for fattening, not for beautification, only for the maintenance and nourishment of this body, for keeping it healthy, for helping with a holy life. That's why you go to the petrol station, just to fill up the vehicle so the vehicle can go where it needs to go. So relating to nourishment on a very sort of simple, practical level. So things like dark chocolate and sugar and such like, tea. The intention behind that is that recognizing that along with more medical medicines like insulin or paracetamol or whatever, that then tonics are there to help give a bit of energy during the day, or if people can't find it difficult to consume enough fuel in the morning, just to make them comfortable through all the whole of the rest of the day and the night, then there are things that are allowable that can help sort of keep the engine running if your tank is only so big, and that can help to keep the system in a healthy state. So it's a balancing act. The idea is that those tonics are say available if they're needed, if they're around, you can make use of them, or you can leave them aside depending on what your physical needs are. But from very early in the earliest days of Amaravati, things were pretty austere here. That it was pretty, not to say back in the old days it was really tough, but it was kind of, it was a pretty bleak place. I mean, it's quite a very different character now, but when people came to visit in the 80s, it was often they thought this was a converted prison camp or an army base, these sort of long wooden huts, and where the cloister is now, there was like an open courtyard. And people would say, is this an army camp? Is this a prison? There was a water tower that looked like a gun emplacement. And it didn't look much like a Buddhist monastery. And the buildings were all uninsulated and pretty bleak. And in the wintertime, there wasn't that. There's quite often very few visitors and such like. So it was early on, because we're kind of the forest tradition with a sort of hardcore kind of can endure, tough it out, the endurance faculty is very highly promoted in our group, the Oton in Thai language. And so that's very much the spirit of the forest tradition. And when Amaravati opened up, Ajahn Amaro was really sort of pushing that, come on, let's just do it. So one of the winter retreat that we had, I think it was beginning of 1986, we began the morning puja at 3 o'clock every day, and we'd finish the evening sitting at 11 every night. And so it was 3 in the morning to 11 at night every day for the whole winter retreat. And it was a really cold winter, and there was my fish pond? No, it was frozen, and there was some monks who were breaking the ice and jumping in the fish pond. Before the 3 o'clock bell. So it was kind of death or glory. It was the kind of ethic of the time. But then it was really interesting, because at the end of that retreat, Ajahn Amaro realized this isn't a very good result, because people were trying to sort of join in with that kind of can-do spirit. But he saw for quite a lot of the community, they were just... It was really like, we can't, this is not sustainable, this is kind of crazy. Yes, there's a sort of vigorous spirit to it, but physically, this is beyond what a lot of people can do. And it's that same era. I remember one time, quite a number of us went to go and donate blood in Berkhamsted, and I think out of about 15 of us, they only accepted like 2 people. All the rest of us were anemic. You haven't got enough iron in your blood. Yeah, we can't take your blood. So it's like, okay. So he realized, okay, I think we need to change our tactics here. So he became quite a lot more liberal with things like cheese and making things that were available for people, because he thought, this is kind of okay for if you're in the U.S. Marines, but this is not workable, and it's not helpful. So he quite consciously adapted the system to be a lot more accommodating for people of different physical capacities. Which for the sort of the testosterone-laden young males, it was like, yeah, right, this death or glory that's the way. But for the large majority of the community, it was not, that kind of austerity wasn't helpful. So he quite deliberately opened things up a bit more on that score, so that people could live here, and then trusting that people, they're not here just to spend their lives lying around and eating sweets. We're here to end suffering, so that and just trusting people's good intentions and their and working things on an honor system, and that letting people use their own wisdom, learning their own limits, their own capacities, their own needs. So I see we've gone past the hour of 4, so let's draw things to a close. So next week, Ajahn Sundara will be offering reflections on don't cling, let it go, on non-clinging. So that'll be the theme for next week. So go well.